If you're talking about it, I'll be talking about it. Dennis Prager here. Join me this morning at 11, right here on AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. And I got to reference this piece in Reader's Digest, which is not something I often say, but so much talk about guns and mental health in the wake of Parkland and other such atrocities. The story is told by a parent of a fifth grader named Chase about a conversation. His name is Glennon Doyle Melton. About a conversation he had with Chase's teacher. What she does and what she's done every week since Columbine. She takes the position that all violence begins with disconnection. All outward violence begins as inner loneliness. So after she watched the tragedy in Columbine, she wants to know who the children are who aren't being noticed, who may fall through the cracks, who may ultimately wrestle with the demons that would lead one to do horrific things. So here's what she does. Each week she has students say that who they want to sit next to.
Okay.
Who they want to sit next to. Every single Friday afternoon, after she asks her students to take out a piece of paper, write down the names of 4 children they'd like to sit next to the following week. The children know that the request may or may not be honored. She also asks the students to nominate one student who they believe has been an exceptional classroom citizen that week. All ballots are submitted to her privately. And then every Friday afternoon, when the students go home, she takes out those papers and puts them in front of her and studies them to look for patterns. She asks who's not getting requested by anyone else. These are the questions she's asking herself. Who can't think of anyone to request? Who never gets noticed enough to be nominated? Who had 1 million friends last week and none this week? She's looking for people that are falling through the cracks of the class's social life, essentially, and wanting to make sure that no one does. And it's kind of, maybe this is a little bit sentimental. I don't know. But certainly the disconnection from society, disaffection from your fellow man is a contributing factor in all of these horrific crimes and, frankly, so many other horrific crimes that don't involve mass casualties. And so the idea of trying to keep, especially at that level, fifth graders, 10-year-olds, connected to one another to maintain their humanity and continue the development of their empathy, I think it's interesting. And I think, sometimes, imagine this, the politicians and the policy advocates don't have all the answers. Practitioners who actually deal with 10-year-old children on a daily basis may have some insights into the human condition and ways to prevent the next Parkland from happening. So I just wanted to point people's attention to that. It's worth checking out, and it should at least be part of this discussion we're having. For more on the discussion we're having generally, though, and with focus on the gun arguments being made, in particular by the left, we're pleased to be joined again by our friend David Harsanyi, who is a nationally syndicated columnist, senior editor at thefederalist.com, and also author of the book First Freedom, a guide through America's enduring history with the gun from the Revolution to today. David, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Always my pleasure. Thanks.
So your piece, your most recent piece in The Federalist that I read yesterday about guns, and frankly, your essential argument that it's very difficult to have an intelligent conversation about guns if we're starting from the premise where people are lying or misrepresenting the NRA, misrepresenting guns, misrepresenting Supreme Court case law, misrepresenting all sorts of things. It's difficult to be productive if we can't get agreement on what the facts are.
Right. I mean, I don't think you can really start a discussion when the basic facts of the debate itself have not been agreed to. So when people talk about, let's say, the Heller decision and claim that it was about handguns in the home and defending your home only, that's not true. It was a much broader decision about many other things, including shotguns and rifles and an individual rather than collective right, things of that nature. So maybe there needs to be some groundwork first before we can actually have a productive conversation.
Well, 6 days after the school massacre, the nation's youth are taking to the microphone. Just wanted to listen and get your reaction to one of the students in Delray Beach. All right. Well,
This
that's
is
not
simply a matter of, are you with us, or are you against us? Are you for taking steps to save us, or are you for taking NRA blood money? We are not letting the United States be run by that terrorist organization.
Comparing the NRA to a terrorist organization, did you think that
Not
it
comparing it to
would,
calling it a
calling
terrorist
yeah.
organization. Yeah.
I mean, do you think it would come to this?
That's what adults call a false choice, I think. But I will say we should allow victims of these things to have their say, and I tend to want to give them some space. But right now there's a man in Colorado in the legislature there who was in Columbine. He was a victim there, who is for expanding, arming teachers and more putting more security into schools. So I mean, there's probably a wide array of opinions even among people who go through that kind of horrific thing. But this NRA is a terrorist organization stuff is pretty ridiculous. I mean, it's not as if the NRA makes mints its own coin and buys politicians. It's an organization that exists because it has support within the populace.
But the left thinks that all politicians that are bought by the NRA should be run out of office, and these kids say they're not stopping until assault rifles and AR-15s are not sold anymore.
AR-15s account for probably around 1% of all criminal activity, gun activity. So I'm not sure why they wouldn't be going after handguns. I mean, I am sure. This is just the first step in trying to confiscate guns. By the way, there's 5 million AR-15s out there. I'm not exactly sure how they're going to accomplish these things. And this is what I'm talking about. First of all, it's not realistic. There's no practical way to do that. I don't think it's constitutional. And they don't know enough about it to have such broad and big opinions about it. But again, they went through something horrible, so I give them space. But many others obviously use them, as political weapons, which I think is sad.
Well, sure. I mean, their rhetoric is not dissimilar from, the Nancy Pelosi's and the Maxine Waterses of the world. I mean, 2 million NRA members are terrorists. Okay, I mean, if that's the way you want to play it. I guess my thing with the kids is, I agree with you, David. Hey, you've been through something traumatic and horrific. Say whatever you got to say. Somebody's pulling your strings probably, but whatever, fine. The thing that's sort of absurd to me is not what the kids are saying. It's the legitimacy given to them by the D.C. press corps as all of a sudden, because they went through this horrific experience, they're somehow policy wonks, and we're supposed to take their lead in terms of policy decisions we make governing a free society. That's a little absurd.
Well, yeah, I mean, in a way, the Constitution exists so that we can't use emotionalism to sway people and to do things that undermine the rights of others who don't have that similar kind of argument. So, I listen to these kids. I feel very bad for them, but their ideas are ridiculous, some of them. The NRA is not a terrorist organization by any definition. And if we want to really do something to help them, I am with them, but they have to open up their minds a little bit and listen to some other arguments, I think.
Well, and also, too, David French made this point last week over at National Review. It's basically, this whole kind of everybody who's a gun rights advocate or who is a Second Amendment aficionado, as a hunter or as a sports shooter, whatever. The idea that everybody who takes a position consistent with NRA's position on a particular topic in this area is somehow bought and paid for by the NRA, including members of Congress, that nobody can actually just believe the same things that the leadership of the NRA promotes in terms of policy. No, you can be honestly pro self-protection, consistent with the vision the founders had of the Second Amendment, and make arguments consistent with that are difficult for some of the sentimentalists to consume.
Right. I mean, the biggest clue that you're not about to engage in a fruitful argument is hearing that the NRA is a terrorist organization when you're talking about guns. The fact is that a lot of people have similar views, and this is part of a bigger push to make it seem like there are just a few people, a few gun nuts out in the world who are holding everything up. It's just not the case. Joe Scarborough made this argument, and I've heard it many times, that only 3% of people own all the guns. That's like saying 3% of readers own all the books. You only need really one gun to defend your household. I may have many more books than my neighbor, but he still has a book, right? So 46% of Americans right now, according to Gallup, have a gun in their home. It's a huge number of people. We don't all agree on everything, but it's still a giant number of people, and a lot of people are still young or older, and they don't have guns. These aren't static positions either. So these are the sorts of things I'm talking about. We can't have a real debate if we're constantly trying to blame one organization or pretending that there are no guns in this country. There are 300 to 400 million guns out there. It's the idea that we're going to confiscate them is just not practical.
One organization that is admitted fault, the FBI. I mean, they received a tip on January 5th, and they did nothing with it. I mean, do you think they have blood on their hands?
I don't think they have blood on their hands, but I do think that's a problem. I'm not sure why people don't lose their jobs when things like this happen, at the very least. And this is why you have to take a holistic look at what's going on. It's mental health, it's law enforcement, and maybe there are ways to strengthen background checks, and maybe there are other things that gun owners can do as well. And it's personal responsibility. I mean, I heard the story before. You have a kid who's, obviously something's wrong with him, and you have a gun safe, filled with guns. Maybe that's not a great idea. I mean, at some point we have to start blaming the people who are around shooters as well to some extent if they do nothing, I think.
One of the other arguments that's been advanced by the usual suspects, including Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut, is, look, we don't want to take away guns. We just want to make the U.S. like Great Britain, like Canada, like Australia, where like in Australia they did take away guns. So, but anyway, but the idea, and it's interesting that there was a response after the Vegas shooting from a former Australian ambassador to the U.S., Joe Hockey, who makes the point, look, I'm not so presumptuous as to tell America how to govern themselves, but I will point out there's a very different culture and a very different history when you compare America to Australia, and that sort of matters. How do you respond to the kind of, let's just be like some of our Western allies?
I do love when people say we don't want to confiscate your guns, but here was this great confiscatory program, program in Australia that we should maybe take a look at. They do want to confiscate guns. They can't yet. Many people want to repeal the Second Amendment. Some people just don't say they want to repeal the Second Amendment. The thing is, we are not Australia, and we have a very different history. And another aspect of this that people don't really talk about is that gun homicides are almost at an all-time low in most places in this country. It's the school shootings that are sort of, horrific and unique. And I'm not sure what's driving them. Obviously, I'm not an expert on that. But overall, gun crimes are down from the 70s to 80s and 90s. So, and we have a different history. Our right to self-defense goes back farther in English history as well than the right to freedom of religion or freedom of speech. I mean, the right to self-defense is embedded in American history, and a lot of people still believe in that. So until you make really strong arguments on that level and talk to them in the way that they can understand with historical context, this debate goes nowhere. It ends up in the same place every time, and frankly, I think the gun control crowd continues to lose. I mean, there really hasn't been any movement on gun control in a long time, and I'm happy about that because I don't think this is a gun problem. I think it's a cultural and people problem.
He is David Harsanyi, nationally syndicated columnist, senior editor for TheFederalist.com, and the book First Freedom: A Ride Through America's Enduring History with the Gun, From the Revolution to Today. David, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.